call the Monday, July 15th board meeting to order. Roll call.
Ms. Nazario.
Here.
Mr. Ferguson. Here. Dr. Ballard.
Here.
Mrs. Washington.
Here.
Mr. Sturgill.
Here.
Pledge allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we begin the formal part of our board meeting tonight, I would like to pause and take a moment of silence to honor some amazing people and some awful tragedies that occurred in the city of Lorain. First, Miss Rhoda Lee. Rhoda Lee was an activist for equity in Mississippi, Youngstown, and Lorain, and she was a true protector of our district and an absolutely beautiful soul, and represented the NAACP with honor and dignity everywhere she went. Mr. Paul Bieber, who dedicated his life to the students and families of Lorain as well in a different way. He taught in the district for 36 years. He was a board member, he was a coach, community leader, and was everywhere where kids were throughout his entire life. And our third one, Jackson Dvorak. He was a student at Palm who would have been entering first grade. And you could, please, I encourage you to look at the long list of accomplishments that Rhoda Lee and Paul Bieber had. And the reality is that for Jackson, we'll never know what he could have accomplished. But we do know that he's loved by his family and by his Lorain City Schools family. Please bow your heads with me for a second. You will all be missed. Thank you. I'd like to recognize we do have two visitors this evening. First, I'd like to recognize our Lorain Education Association president, Ms. Julie Garcia, with some great news to share with the district.
Good evening, everybody. I'm here to give you some updates about the LEA. We applied for an affiliate grant through OEA, and those grants are to be used to help members become more active in the association, get out into the community. So I want to give you a list of our grant. We received the grant for 2 years to the tune of approximately $80,000. So we will be very busy. These are opportunities for our members to come out and volunteer, to show some appreciation to each other. So let me start with, we will be at the district back to school events in August. We will also be participating in the literacy nights that we have throughout the school year. We give away the recycle bags, shopping bags that the families use to carry all their fun stuff that they get. We will be giving out, every kindergartner will receive a specially designed t-shirt for all of our new kindergarten students. We gave away the signs last year, but we decided to go with t-shirts and make them just a little bit bigger so they can wear them for a couple years. So I'm working with Lake Screen Printing to come up with a cute design for our kindergartners. We also will be having a freshman t-shirt design contest. All of the freshmen will be receiving a Titans t-shirt. I spoke to Mrs. Cheers, and they are going to open up a contest for the design. We'll have those printed and hopefully hand them out to all of the freshmen for homecoming so they can wear them to their homecoming game. And the idea is that it will say class of 2028, so they'll be able to wear it for the 4 years that they were here in high school. So for at least the next 2 years, our freshman class, everybody will receive a t-shirt. We also have a building buddy program where we have a more senior teacher who's been with the district for a while to help our new teachers get acclimated, just to find the things around the buildings, the copy paper, the secretary, the custodian. So it's a program that we started about 3 years ago, and our new teachers like it because they don't know, what's going on, and they're all new teachers. We also have our new teacher orientation, which will happen August 8th, to bring all of our new teachers in and give them some information. We have a fun scavenger hunt that the teachers enjoy participating in, and we send them around to the admin office, and they get to put a face with a name with Dr. Graham, the health insurance, the treasurer, and when they come and they solve the little riddle, they get a little prize, and they collect a bunch of swag by the end of the day. We will be participating in the homecoming parade. This year, we have funding that will not only allow us to throw out candy that the kids love to get, we are going to have little Titan footballs, logos for them to throw out. And we'll be sharing those with the cheerleaders so they can pass those out at the football games as well. We will participate in trunk or treat events with the Rising Titans, as well as the trick or treat that we have at the administration building. We also, part of our grant is to socialize with other unions. Our district has about 8 or 9 different unions, and so we've decided that we want to socialize with each other. Because we are the largest, we have the funds available, but the small unions don't really have that. So we wrote into our grant that we would have some social time just to get together and kind of know that we support each other. And we've been working side by side, but you don't really know each other. We're going to participate in the Lorain County Labor Day Festival. We also have our Breakfast with Santa, which will be the 4th year in a row. Some of you have participated in our Breakfast with Santa. It's a very popular event. And then we will also be able to continue to have our scholarships for our Lorain High School seniors, funded by our participation at Rockin' on the River, which we have had administrators, teachers, custodians, parapros, secretaries come and volunteer to help raise those funds so that we can give those scholarships out to our seniors. So those are some of the things that we're looking forward to doing this year and then the following year. So hopefully we'll see you at some of those events.
And I just want to say very quickly that I truly appreciate LEA and their focus on celebrating people and making people feel welcome into our family. So you do above and beyond constantly in all the different angles you follow to make sure that nobody slips through the cracks. So just thank you very much for that.
We enjoy doing it.
Thank you.
And our second guest tonight, and I'm going to read this so I don't screw it up, Dr. Christina Collins, who is the Executive Director of Honesty for Ohio Education and a former state school board member.
Yes. Yeah, so also, I am an educator. I was a high school English teacher. I was a curriculum director for 10 years before going on to be on the Ohio State Board of Education, where I served until December of last year before moving to this position. So I was asked, Mrs. Washington reached out and asked me to come and speak about release time for religious instruction. You've probably been hearing a lot about LifeWise in the news, so I am coming to talk to you about that today. First, I want to talk about how Honesty got involved in this. I breezed over it, but our mission, we are a coalition of 70 organizations across the state of Ohio. We include the NAACP, lots of regions of the NAACP, ACLU, we include LGBTQ organizations, both teachers' unions, lots of groups, like I said, 70. We work in coalition, which means that we have a weekly meeting, we stay on the same page, we reach thousands of Ohioans. Our mission, again, convene, educate, and activate individuals and communities to protect honest and inclusive education, building a more representative democracy for every Ohioan. So how we came to this topic is interesting. We started convening local community members across Ohio in any school district with the goal of teaching them how local school districts run. Talking about providing testimony, talking about what board policy does for local governance of schools, talking about all the way up to the State House, where the power rests when it comes to education governance. We were inundated pretty quickly with lots of people who were concerned about LifeWise Academy. So we started taking that up as an issue, offering support to community members. There is a group that exists called Parents Against LifeWise. We are not affiliated with them. We provide support documents to this group, as well as any other parents, community members who want to learn how to provide testimony or learn about what's going on with LifeWise. So how we got here in terms of release time for religious instruction in 2014, I don't know if any of you were on the board back in 2014, but back then is when law was passed that would allow local districts to adopt this policy. I did notice Lorain City Schools did not adopt the policy until this year, January of 2024. It's policy 5223. At that time and currently, the law says that districts may adopt a policy, which means it's an option for districts to do. That is how we've gotten to this point where this particular group, LifeWise Academy, has really started growing significantly in Ohio. They appeared in 2021. My first interaction with them was as a State Board of Education member. They came and did a presentation to the State Board about what they were offering. Their goal, as it states on their website, is to reach unchurched public school students during the school day. So they do take students from school to an off-site location for Bible education. And from their website, their interpretation of the Bible is a high view of the authority of Scripture, which is aligned with historic Orthodox Christian beliefs. And that shows up in their curriculum. So I'm going to kind of address their curriculum in a minute. Statewide, this represents how quickly spread has happened. So the top picture shows you currently the current status in Northeast Ohio. Lorain is like the top center of that. So you can see a lot of green in there. Green is somewhere before coming to the school for permission to have a program. So, and I think I have a slide here next that shows where yours specifically is. The second picture shows you central to north Ohio. So the red are areas where LifeWise has reached step 10, meaning that they can have a program and may be running a program in at least one elementary school. I think there may only be one high school that's running a program in the entire state if that one is happening. The majority of them are in K-5 situations. So very rapid expansion, millions of dollars of funding have come to this organization. They just purchased an aquatic center in Hilliard for $3 million to become their national headquarters for LifeWise. So Ohio is the epicenter of this program as it is starting to spread nationally. So their model of implementation is taking students during lunch or recess in some places, and this is again 10,000-foot view, all of Ohio. These are the models that are in place across Ohio. There are models where they are in specials classes, so students may be pulled out of a special and taken to their LifeWise programming. There are some districts where LifeWise is a special in the rotation, and students who don't go to LifeWise go to like a study hall or go to the gym. And then there is also a model of taking any library time for students to go during a library time. So what we found is some models, and Wadsworth is a great example of this, some models start during a lunch or recess period, and then once there is enough parent support, LifeWise will start to push to be a special in the school district. So in Wadsworth, LifeWise did a survey of parents that said, would you like to see this during a specials time, to try and activate parents around pushing into specials periods. So what is LifeWise? Continued, this is the image for Lorain City Schools. So they are in step 5 of 10, where they are drafting a plan. Step 6 is where they would come to obtain school approval. So since you have policy 5223, effectively, they don't need board approval, they'll need superintendent approval to operate because the board has already passed that policy. So just kind of keeping in mind where you're at this moment in terms of LifeWise being able to have a program in the district. So what's problematic about LifeWise, there's a lot of issues, and some of them have been in the news even in the last week. I have the superintendent of Sheffield Lake said, we purposely try to avoid disrupting a student's day with coming and going. Dismissing students to a private enterprise supported by the state seems counterproductive towards meeting the other expectations that the state of Ohio asks us as a district. And I quote that because it is a disruption of a student's time during the school day. That's one of the key issues with it. There's also the issue of safety for students. That's probably something you've seen recently. There are issues with their background checks. They do not use BCI and FBI checks. And there's also issues with full vetting of staff. So the story you may have seen recently was one of their directors of a program had her license revoked and permanently denied by the state of Ohio for her interactions with students. And while that may not have shown up on a background check, as you know, if it was never reported or investigated by police, that's a simple, search on Educator Core with the state. So anyone could have found that information. There's also accessibility and IEP issues in that they are not required to have accessibility. They're not required to address IEPs in any way. They do incentivize students to recruit other students to come back with them. They offer candy, all kinds of things, treats, all kinds of incentives. They do have what Honesty considers inherently discriminatory teachings, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But their full curriculum is confidential, so no one has access to the full curriculum. There is a lawsuit about that right now because somebody did release the full curriculum. If you've seen that, that's not affiliated with Honesty's work. The doctrine, the curriculum that they do teach, their actual, we'll see it in a second, but their actual statements of their beliefs indicate non-Christians are going to hell, that people living in LGBTQ relationships are going to hell because they're sinners, and it condemns unmarried parents and says that parents that are not married are living in sin. There's no safety measures or accountability for student safety off campus, which I'll show you their release of liability statement in just a moment. And then both Dr. Graham and Mrs. Washington have this presentation. Everything in yellow are links, so they can share it out and you can see the links for yourself later. These are from a public document, which again is linked down here, called difficult questions from students, how to deal with difficult questions from students. And I'm not gonna read all of these to you. I'll read a couple that I just referenced. So my mom's boyfriend lives with us, is that a sin? They say when two people reject God's plan and choose to live together without getting married first, God says it is a sin. What would God think if I changed my gender? What does the Bible say about being in same-sex relationships? That says this was and still is God's perfect plan, that it's a man and a woman. God's word tells us that anything different from this kind of romantic relationship is sin. So again, you can see these later for yourself, but this is the basis of the curriculum that they teach students when they take them out of their public school day to this off-site location and then bring them back to school. These are references and resources you can review later. You have probably heard of House Bill 445, which was introduced in March. It is currently assigned to the House Primary and Secondary Education Committee. Originally, it was gonna move pretty quick. There was a moment in June when we thought it was gonna fly really fast, and luckily it has slowed down. I believe Representative Manning is your representative up here. She is the chair of the Primary and Secondary Education Committee and seems to be pretty responsive to people kind of pushing against continuing.
Just for the record,
doing
actually,
this.
Joe Miller represents.
Oh,
right.
Joe, okay, all right. Do you have?
Nathan Manning.
Oh, you have, okay, Senator Manning. So if 445 were to become law, it would force all school districts to have a policy, which again, you already have a policy in place. But a lot of school districts have been rescinding their policies or have not had, they've never adopted the policy in the first place. So because you have adopted this policy, what can you do at this point? You have several options that you can think about if you want to think about anything, if you want to change anything. The first option is you could do nothing. You could keep your policy as it is. A second policy is you could rescind it, which again, some districts have done. Hannah is an example of a district that rescinded their policy. The third option is you could change your policy at this point. If you were to change your policy, what we are seeing districts do is the first thing we're seeing them do, Toledo just did this, Berea just did this, but they made sure to clarify that all courses are core classes in their districts. So they changed their language to say, blah, 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 the student is not absent from core curriculum subject courses. The school district deems all courses to be core curricular, which prevents the program from ever interceding on specials courses, but it still allows that lunchtime and recess time to be potentially used for the program. I do note that you have the liability statement built into your policy currently, which says that the entity will assume all liability. I encourage you to compare that with their release of liability statement, which essentially says parents who are agreeing for their students to attend are releasing liability from LifeWise being liable for any harm that could come to their students. So that's kind of in direct conflict with what your policy would require them to have. That may be something for you to negotiate when this program comes to your door, because of that complete release of liability that they require parents to sign off on. And then what we do encourage all school districts to consider, of course, is the safety of the student. And we encourage districts, we, Honesty, are encouraging districts to include, if you're going to have the policy, safety guardrails, such as those background checks. I don't know if you required, a lot of the districts that I was in required even volunteers to have BCI and FBI checks. That seems like a pretty baseline expectation for anybody who's going to be around children to have, is a BCI and FBI. Again, that is not what they use. They use a private entity, and they just switched from Protect My Ministry, which was the background check they were using previously, to another national but private entity for their background checks. Also encourage record keeping, accessibility for students, not allowing the incentivizing. That is one thing. I think Cloverleaf is an example of a district that said they're not allowing students to come back with treats and gifts and stuff to recruit other students. They aren't allowing that to happen. And then time constraints, because even if you are just allowing them during recess and lunch, there is nothing that prevents them from bringing students back late or being late to pick them up. So having those kinds of constraints in place to help kind of flesh out that policy a little bit more. Since she is not your representative, I do encourage you to email Representative Manning with your thoughts, whether your thoughts are to encourage her to push the bill through or to discourage her. If you're interested in some talking points, things like, you know, local control and the importance of local control in this decision making, that lack of guardrails, and then the serious concerns for the materials that are being taught and student safety. And then I'll just leave this up here for right now, but this is, if you'd like to join any of Honesty's mailing lists, we send out this kind of information on a weekly basis, especially when the State House is in session. So I don't know if there are any questions. That was a ton of information. I apologize for that. I hope I covered everything that needed to be covered, though.
Question. Are any other religious groups involved in projects like these in Ohio at this point?
It's minimal. None are nearly as well funded as this group.
Okay,
this
but
entity.
but that could happen, correct?
It could, absolutely, yeah. And I think I've only maybe heard of like a couple other community-oriented groups
Okay.
that have taken advantage of it. Anything else?
Any other questions?
All right. Thank
No,
you.
that was
Thank you
wonderful.
all
Thank
so
you
much.
very
Feel
Dr.
free
Collins,
to
appreciate
reach
your time. Thank you very much.
Appreciate
Yes,
it.
thank you.
Yes, very informative.
Very informative. If we can approve the minutes from the July 5th special meeting, and we reserve the right to read the minutes.
Support.
Roll call.
Mrs. Washington?
Yes.
Dr. Ballard?
Yes.
Mrs. Nazario?
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson? Yes. Mr. Sturgill?
Yes.
Old business.
What's that?
Old business?
Old business, and another challenge facing school districts today that's a pretty popular one to address is a cell phone policy. And this is something we've been looking at now for several months, and I missed the meeting today, so Mr. Scott gives an update on exactly where we are. I'd appreciate it.
All right, Dr. Graham, thank you. Just to kind of remind everyone where we've been, we did have some board dialogue where we shared survey results with families, staff, and students in regards to the cell phones in general, where they're valued, time spent, and things of that nature. We've also discussed some of the research-based symptoms of increased screen time and phone usage. We've engaged in a couple months, as Dr. Graham alluded to, of conversations to listen and learn more. And I've shared with each board member Ohio's cell phone in schools model policy. They have some criteria in their model policy that speaks to the research. I'll read. The research shows that student use of cell phones in schools has negative effects on student performance and mental health. Cell phones distract students from classroom instruction, resulting in smaller learning gains and lower test scores. Increased cell phone use has led to higher levels of depression, anxiety, and other mental health disorders in children. Talked about applicability of the policy, the use of cell phones. In this model policy, students are prohibited from using cell phones at all times. There are exceptions, whether it's IEP related, health related. make recommendations in regards to cell phone storage in the model policy, speaking to it being secured in a secure place, such as student's locker, or closed backpack storage device provided by the district at all times. And then it speaks to consequences for infractions of said model policy. If you turn in that packet I provided, our policy, which is PO 5136, speaks to personal communication devices. And our policy is very restrictive in nature and protective. It does address concerns with privacy and harassment, bullying. In the second paragraph, though, it says students may use PCDs before or after school. Then it also includes during their lunch break, in between classes, as long as they do not create a distraction, disruption, or otherwise interfere with the educational environment during after-school activities, etc. Use of PCDs, except those approved by a teacher or administrator, any other time is prohibited, and they must be powered completely off. So, group of administrators, we've listened, like I said, we surveyed staff, students, and families, and we have some recommendations that we'll formally want to present for policy review. But to give you a little insight on where the conversation was, here's where we landed. One, the idea that our policy does restrict cell phone usage. However, phones have been identified as a distraction, disruption, and interferes with the educational environment. So therefore, what we're experiencing in real time is not a contradiction. It says they should not be used if they create distractions, disruptions. Then we have enough qualifiable and quantifiable evidence that there have been distractions that are interfering with the learning environment. So our suggestion is to no usage during the school day and store it in a storage device provided by the district. So there'll be language that we would want you guys to obviously have a first reading on and obviously have some opportunities to provide to do what the board does with policy. And then from that point, there would be administrative guidelines that we would then work with our administrators on so that that policy could be implemented in a systemic secondary approach. Once again, we are looking at grades 6 through 12 for the adjustment of guidelines for it, because we do believe K through 5 you should not have your devices out as with other grade levels. But in regards to securing them, we would be looking at a secondary approach. So we've worked with, in the last couple of weeks, led by the high school administration. We've also, they've worked with the middle school to create a system so that when kids enter 6th grade, we're uniform throughout our approach. So I could share some of the suggestions on administrative guidelines if you would like those now as well. What we are suggesting, recommending relative to administrative guidelines is that the PCDs are secured in locked yonder pouches upon entry to school and unlocked at the conclusion of the school day. We are recommending that no elementary PCDs are allowed, but they must be turned off and stored in a backpack type device there. And then where we left the conversation was around lost or damaged pouches. We would have a recommendation there that there would be a replacement fee to some degree. Obviously, we have not landed on a number for that yet, but every student would get one, obviously, without a charge. But if there are lost or damaged pouches, we would say that there should be some sort of fee to recoup some of those costs, just like we have with other.
I don't know how far you're into this, but students wouldn't be these pouches wouldn't leave the building, correct?
Well, we had a conversation about that, and we've weighed both sides. And in this case, yes, the recommendation is that they would come in to school with those devices locked. It's no different than what our former policy stated. The phones were to be often if they were seen in areas that they were not, there were consequences for those. So the same thing would be applied here. We would be recommending that the students would secure their device, and if they were caught with them unsecure, then we would follow a administrative guideline in regards to not being in adherence with the school code conduct.
I have a question. Should I wait till you're finished though?
I think I have kind of given you the summary of where we are. What our plan was to come to the next board meeting with a policy for you to review as a board. Obviously, give any feedback or pieces there, and then go through a second reading and move accordingly. So.
Hold on, this is not the first reading.
No, this is not, because we haven't made a formal policy recommendation to you. I just wanted to give you the insight into what will be recommended to you, and do so in a very public manner.
So the pouches basically lock at a certain time and they unlock at a certain time, or how?
They're magnetized.
It's magnetized.
So before they
So
leave,
before they come in, they would magnetize, and before they, on their way out, they would be able to, there would be stations where they would be able to
so who will
demagnetize their
man
phones.
that, like, say, in the morning?
Just
in the
like
morning,
entry
it's kinda
where
crazy.
administration would be
Okay.
present. But the students, I mean, these are, in my understanding, these are pretty self-sufficient once the students learn the routines and how it works.
You don't
They-
need the magnet to lock it. It's very
Right.
similar to the anti-theft device
Okay.
you'd see at a department store.
Okay.
They
Oh,
put
okay.
they put the phone in, they close it.
Close
There's a
it.
special lock to unlock it.
Unlocks it.
It's it sits on a stand very similar to what we had when we had hand sanitizer stands everywhere.
And we would get X amount of those unlocking devices by ratio of
Right.
student.
Yeah.
So,
One per 100 students.
right. So we would have enough.
And in terms of exit and entrance, it'd be no different than when our students tapped in.
Right.
Now you open your phone. Now,
You'd
whether
be
you take.
tapping out to.
Exactly. Whether you do take your yonder bags home, or we have baskets, or however that works out, again, that'll be in the administrative guidelines that we need to figure out.
That's,
Yeah.
needs some, I
And there is a
have
ton
seen
of,
kids leave them at home on purpose.
And we replaced, I don't know if you have a number, but just plugs for the computer.
sure.
I mean, there
Chargers,
was a
yeah.
lot of chargers that
Right.
we had to replace.
Right.
And that was a lot of money. And my concern also would be if a family couldn't afford the charge, then what would we do?
Right.
I don't think
I could
taking
take
home
it home
would
because
be
I know I didn't have to
a good
pay
idea.
for it. The other thing that has happened that I've seen is kids with two cell phones.
Sure.
Will put the
Yeah. And we spend a lot of time.
sleeper phone in.
Yeah, so we did spend a lot of time talking about, the what if scenarios. And to me, it's like anything else. There will be, our students, there are opportunities for anybody to deviate from the
Right.
rules and expectations. What we do when that deviation from rules and expectations occur is aligned with policy and has to be consistently enforced. When things are consistently enforced, we build habits, and we could be better off with consistency. However, it is, and I've played the opposite side of this conversation for a long time. If I can, I'll just share a quick personal story.
Please,
I have a daughter and a son, 7 and 6, and screen time matters to them already. Tablet time has been a part of their life longer than I'd like it to be, but when the grandparents buy things, you kind of just have to go along with it for a while. It got to the point where every day my children were asking for their allotted tablet time. Like they had to have their 30 minutes to an hour or whatever it may be tablet time, where they asked about it every day. So I did engage in the reading this school year of Anxious Generation, and Ross and I went back and forth all year. I felt like in public and private conversations. And this summer, I decided to work on limiting my children's tablet screen time. I put a measure about 40 to 50% reduction. And what I've noticed as we wind up the summer is that my children have not asked for those tablets. They just don't ask for them anymore. because there are so many other things that they've been engaged in this summer. And I think that's an important piece, and it was hard. There were times where myself as a parent, I wanted to do other things, and the tablet was an easy way of giving them time and space so that I could do the things that I wanted to do. I had to make some changes in my practice along with my wife. Those were hard at first, but we just were on a mini vacation, and my son and daughter just learned solitaire and chess because they weren't using that time. I guess I'm not fully converted, but I do see the benefits. And I think the things that I've heard from teachers for the last, let's say, a couple years we've been engaged in this conversation is just want a fighting chance in the classroom setting. And as a parent, that's gone through this, I can see where that argument comes to bear fruit as well. We still have a heck of a lot of work to do relative to our strategic plan. So this isn't the magic wand that all of a sudden is going to turn our district around. However, when we start talking about access to education, that does increase when we are engaged. When we start talking about a healthy culture and how students are engaging with each other, well, at least during these 7.5 hours that we have here, they're not posting to social media. They're not less engaged with their instructors because here we are, and we have that fighting chance. Now, we still, as a school organization, have to do right with that time, and those are the things that we'll continuously work on. We're asking for a fighting chance, and I think this gives us that.
Has the high school administration been involved in the discipline penalty phase? Has this been discussed?
They are, right now, not only the high school, but the middle school administration are working on administrative guidelines, which would also include consequential responses for infractions.
And again, for the folks here, but also for the folks watching on TV, administrative guidelines are how the administration implements board policy. So the board says, operate within inside this box, and we determine the best way to do that. So we're still piecing some of those things together to figure out the logistics behind how to execute what we're doing, and we've got some time to figure that out, but we're engaging, trying to engage all the right people.
But realistically, with any new standard of practice, there are going to be a learning curve there. And anytime you try to change habits, consistency is the key to changing said habit, whether we're talking fitness or study habits, whatever habit you're trying to either engage in or break. Ongoing communication, explaining why, being consistent. That's what we're asking for here. So at the next board meeting, to me, like I said, and I still have a team that is working on policy adjustments for your recommendations for policy adjustments to the board. But I think where we've landed is that second paragraph. Everything else within the policy are the right things that should be in policy. What we're asking for will be some language in that second paragraph that kind of gives us the latitude to then outline the administrative guidelines that we've talked about today.
I've talked to more than a couple districts who use the Yonder bags, and no one is disappointed. Everyone is pleased with that effort.
Yeah. We discussed lock boxes in classrooms, Yonder bags. We discussed manila envelopes. We discussed keeping them students keeping them in their own locker. I think with anything that we do, we begin something, we analyze it along the way, and we get feedback, and we listen, learn, and continue to lead. So this is our recommendation at this phase, and we'll listen and learn and lead accordingly. But we wanted to make sure that we got something first in philosophical conversation for you as a board, our community as a large, and then we'll have some language tweaks at the next board meeting and go from there.
So we should be able to implement this year?
Yes.
We'll get the Yonder, what is the cost of Yonder bags?
For secondary, Ross, I'd like to invite Ross Main to the
Yeah, thanks.
conversation.
It's
Boom, that happened.
yeah, nicely played. $25.50 per student, and that includes the pouch. It includes the unlocking
stand.
discs, and then a small number of handheld unlocking magnets for each school as well.
And please keep in mind, that is just for secondary,
Right,
6 through 12
6 through
students.
12.
So we're not purchasing for, our recommendation would not be to purchase for the whole district.
Right.
Do you know how many students approximately?
So it'd be right around 3,000. Yep.
Okay.
The most important thing with the whole thing is the consistency with the consequences of Harrison function. Because I know Southfield has been very, very successful with political administration, so we have had no problem, and that's because of the consistency of the implementation. I think that's more important than anything.
100% agree.
Thank you.
And part of our, I guess, in addition to the language recommendations that we'll have, we can review survey results again, so that's fresh on everyone's mind, so that we can realize that this isn't just something that a few people up in a tower thought of, but, we did take the time to survey, do some listening groups, and we'll have to continue to do that if we, were to move forward towards the implementation piece as well.
And the consistent emerging research on the impact of cell phone and social media on teen mental health as well. I think it's important to go with that discussion too.
The reason I like the Yonder bags is because the phone never leaves the student's person.
Yep.
You just can't use it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I got a question. Do we have a manned phone, like, say, if somebody did have an emergency?
Every classroom has a phone.
Yep. Every
But, I mean,
classroom.
if somebody calls the school,
So-
parent calls the school, do we have a person that answers the phone, but it says, or does it say, if you would like to speak to so-and-so? So we don't have
Often
an
goes to
actual
voicemail.
person that's answering the phone, so, I mean, I'm just wondering about handling an emergency, because that in itself could
Right.
get frustrating.
So I think at different buildings, I'll be honest, there's a different flux of phone calls that come in a different amount. There are times where calls have gone to voicemail, and we have to check and then respond accordingly. So it's not like there's a switchboard operator that's going to answer every call every time it rings. So I would be foolish to say that happens, but I would think that as a practice, more calls are answered when they come in than not. I don't have the quantifiable data behind that, but as a building administrator for years at both levels of secondary, middle school, and high school, I worked with some phenomenal people that bust their butt to answer phones as expediently as possible, and when that didn't happen, they called back. If there are areas that we need to refine, then so be it. But I would not want, and I'm not trying to minimize anything by any stretch. I think we have to keep the main thing, and not allow some things to detour us off the cause and the causation. We are in a situation where every minute with our students matter. Every moment of engagement matters. We are also, as a district, trying to capitalize on all those minutes in the face of a very high chronic absenteeism.
Right.
We are going to have some real honest conversations if we're going to move forward as a community and as a learning community. I beg us all to keep those things in mind as we have our conversations, and keep pushing, though, on areas where we need to refine as a school system. That is our work. So we won't ignore those things, but we can't take our eyes off the prize and the main things that we've identified that we need to address to give us a fighting shot to turn our school system around.
But your point, Bill, that is something we would need to consider to find out, to make sure that we've got plans in place to make sure that parents have access.
Yeah.
That's my only concern, because even if you're calling your doctor anymore, first thing they say is listen carefully, because our menu has changed. You know,
it's an
that if
emergency,
somebody's got
you
an
have to call
emergency, they
911.
don't wanna listen, they don't wanna listen to all that, they just wanna get information to their, I'm just hoping that we come up with something that's maybe a little bit better than what we have.
Fair. And I do want to recommend everyone, if you go to the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce website under school wellness, cell phones in school, there are a ton of quick links that are supports to families, that are supports to districts, to administrators, to staff, a lot of resource there that would benefit us all to lean in on as we have our conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Scott? Okay. Reports and recommendation of the treasurer.
I have items 8.01 to 8.06 for your perusal and approval. Specifically, under item 8.03, where we need to recognize a delegate and an alternate to attend the OSBA Capital Conference. The president has suggested that Barbie Washington and Mark Ballard serve those positions to represent the board. If there is any discussion on that or anything else.
Because that's how they were last year, so we just kept it the same as it was last year.
So moved. Over the whole?
Support.
Any discussion? Roll call?
Dr. Ballard,
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill,
Yes.
Mrs. Nazario,
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson, yes. Mrs. Washington,
Yes.
Thank you. Reports and recommendation of the superintendent.
Thank you. I'd like the board to consider for approval item 9.01 in personnel matters.
So moved.
Support?
support.
Any discussion? Roll call?
Dr. Ballard,
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson, yes. Mrs. Nazario,
Yes.
Mrs. Washington,
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill,
Yes.
I'd like the board to consider for approval item 9.02 in personnel matters.
So moved.
A second?
Support. Which ones?
9.02. Okay. Any discussion? Roll call?
oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Dr. Ballard,
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill,
It's 9:13.
Mr. Sturgill,
Yes.
Mrs. Nazario.
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson, yes. Mrs. Washington,
I have to abstain.
I'd like the board to consider for approval items 9.03 to 9.12.
So moved.
Support.
Any discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Washington,
Yes.
Dr. Ballard,
Yes.
Mrs. Nazario,
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson, yes. Mr. Sturgill,
Yes.
I'd like the board to consider for approval item 9.13 for personnel matters.
So
For
moved.
approval.
That's why I abstained.
I'll support.
Any discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Washington,
Yes.
Dr. Ballard,
Yes.
Mrs. Nazario,
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson, yes. Mr. Sturgill,
I abstain. I have a relative on that.
I'd like the board to consider for approval items 9.14 to 9.16.
So moved.
Support.
Any discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Sturgill,
Yes.
Dr. Ballard,
Yes.
Mrs. Nazario,
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson, yes. Mrs. Washington,
Yes.
I'd like the board to consider for approval item 9.17 personnel matters.
So moved.
Support.
Any discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Washington,
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill,
Yes.
Mrs. Nazario,
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson abstains. Dr. Ballard,
Yes.
And actually, I'm told, Bill, I'm told you're supposed to abstain, but I don't see the list.
He did.
Oh, he did? I'm sorry, he said,
Oh, no.
Oh, on
We
this
voted
one?
on this one.
9/7/9/17?
Yeah, that's
I don't
what we
know
have.
anybody on the list that would be a conflict. I just want to make sure before we continue.
Missy?
Is Missy on
Oh,
there?
is Missy on this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh,
thanks.
Can I take, I'll abstain then.
Thank you.
And since we need to react on the motion because Mr. Sturgill made the motion.
So moved.
So,
Thank you.
okay.
Okay, roll call.
Dr. Ballard,
Yes.
Mrs. Washington,
Yes.
Mrs. Nazario,
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson, abstain. Mr. Sturgill,
Abstain.
I'd like the board to consider for approval items 10.01 to 10.41 in operations matters.
So moved.
Support.
Any discussion?
Yes, I just want to make sure that the public knows that we do have the season passes, and they're a great deal. You save a lot of money to support the kids in athletics.
Very true.
Yes.
Yes, they are.
And for senior citizens, free.
Yes. free
Thank you for that.
seniors,
Yep.
Senior citizens.
And roll call, sorry.
do we have a motion?
Oh, did we have a motion? Yeah. Mark,
I'll make the motion.
Mark and.
Okay.
And I support it.
Okay, very good, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm new to this. Dr. Ballard,
Yes.
Mrs. Washington,
Yes.
Mrs. Nazario,
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson, yes. Mr. Sturgill,
Yes.
And that's all I have for this evening.
Thank you. Any new business? Any committee reports? Second hearing of the public? Our next board meeting will be a special meeting on July 29th at 9 a.m. here in the board meeting room.
If I could just speak to that very quickly. I've had people ask questions about why there are so many board meetings over the summer and why we keep announcing and changing. The reality is for the first one that happened, we thought we had the language finalized for our levy and we didn't. So we had to wait to have a special meeting for that. And the change for this meeting is the Ohio Department of Education, Workforce Development, has a new process to follow when a school is facing a deficit. And candidly, and it's on a website we've been talking about it for over a year, we're looking at a major deficit in a couple of years. And as a result, we have to have a worksheet worked out with the Ohio Department of Education, which is very different than the process we followed in the past. In the past, it would be bullet points on how we intended to address our deficit. Now it's very, very specialized in categories, and people walk through us, so it's much, much more detailed. We've met with them 3 or 4 times, and we have another meeting or 2 set up. And once that process is done, the board has to vote by the end of the month. So we thought we'd be ready by July 22nd, and now it's looking more like July 29th. So I appreciate your patience. We're just doing our best to make sure that everything is accounted as it should be.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Support.
Roll call?
Mrs. Washington,
Yes.
Dr. Ballard,
Yes.
Mrs. Nazario,
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson, yes. Mr. Sturgill,
Yes.
Thank you.
Were you off, Michael?